When I called my son to ask what time I should arrive for my grandson's college graduation party, the line went completely dead. Then my daughter-in-law snatched the phone, laughed a sharp sound that reminded me of breaking glass, and said the party had already happened last Sunday. She explicitly told me my rusted pickup truck and flannel work shirts did not fit the aesthetic of the wealthy investor friends they had invited. For a few seconds I simply stood there in my workshop, holding the phone. The smell of fresh-cut mahogany filled the air around me. Wood shavings covered the concrete floor, and sitting in the center of the room was the finest desk I had ever built. 3 months of work. Hundreds of hours. Every joint cut by hand. Every surface sanded until it felt smooth as glass. I built it for my grandson, Cameron. He had just graduated at the top of his architecture class. I wanted him to start his career with something that would outlast trends, something built with patience and integrity. Now I wasn't even welcome at his celebration. The call had ended, but Melissa's words kept echoing in my head. You would have embarrassed us. Not because I was rude, not because I was difficult, because I looked like a man who worked with his hands. I placed the phone carefully on my workbench. Then I walked outside. The afternoon sun felt unusually cold. My old pickup started on the first turn of the key. 40 minutes later, I was parked 2 streets away from Brian's neighborhood. I wasn't looking for an argument. I wanted the truth. And the truth was waiting for me at the end of their driveway. Workers were dismantling a massive white luxury tent. Crystal chandeliers hung from temporary steel supports. Delivery trucks loaded expensive furniture into trailers. Florists carried away arrangements larger than dining tables. This wasn't a small family gathering. This was a production, a very expensive one. They hadn't forgotten to invite me. They had intentionally excluded me. I stood there watching for nearly 10 minutes. The more I observed, the calmer I became. Anger burns hot. Understanding is cold. And cold lasts much longer. I returned to my truck and drove home. Back to the property where I'd spent most of my life. Back to the workshop. Back to the land everyone assumed belonged to a retired mechanic living on a modest pension. That assumption had protected me for years, including from my own son. Inside my office sat a heavy steel safe. I opened it and removed a leather-bound ledger. Most people who knew me believed I had struggled financially after retirement. That story wasn't true. 10 years earlier, I had quietly sold my commercial equipment leasing company. The final sale price had been $40 million. Every cent had gone into a protected blind trust. No flashy lifestyle, no luxury cars, no public announcements. I wanted Brian to build his own success instead of waiting for mine. Unfortunately, somewhere along the way, he stopped valuing hard work and started valuing appearances. I closed the ledger and stared at the numbers. Something about that graduation party bothered me. A man with Brian's salary couldn't afford an event that extravagant. Neither could Melissa's struggling design business. The math didn't work. And whenever the numbers don't work, there's usually a reason. The next morning, I drove downtown to meet my attorney. By the time I left his office, I wasn't thinking about a graduation party anymore, because sitting on his computer screen was a document that changed everything. A $3 million commercial loan application. And attached to it was my 60-acre property, used as collateral, signed with my name, except I had never signed it. My son had. I didn't confront Brian. I didn't call Melissa. And I certainly didn't tell them what I'd discovered. People make mistakes when they think they're safe. I wanted them comfortable. So I smiled, stayed quiet, and started digging. The forged loan documents gave my attorney enough reason to launch a deeper investigation. What we found was worse than I imagined. The $3 million bridge loan wasn't being used for business expansion. It wasn't funding new projects. It wasn't even generating revenue. Most of the money had disappeared into a desperate attempt to keep Melissa's image alive. The luxury design company she constantly bragged about was collapsing. Months behind on vendor payments, multiple lawsuits from contractors, outstanding tax obligations, even employees who hadn't been paid on time. The glamorous social media photos showed success. The financial records showed panic. Everything was built on debt. And my property was supposed to be their escape route. 3 days later, I decided to pay them a visit, not as an angry father, as an observer. Melissa's studio occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse downtown. Glass walls, modern furniture, designer lighting, the kind of place meant to impress investors. When I walked in wearing my usual flannel shirt, several employees glanced at me like I was lost. Melissa appeared moments later. The smile she gave me looked forced. Charles, what a surprise. I noticed she didn't call me Dad. She never did. I was in the area, I said calmly. Thought I'd stop by. She gave me a quick tour. The entire time I watched carefully. Too many empty workstations. Too many unpaid delivery notices sitting on desks. Too many worried employees pretending not to be worried. This company wasn't thriving. It was drowning. Then Brian arrived. His expensive suit looked impressive until you knew the truth. People drowning in debt often dress like millionaires. They hope appearances can delay reality. For a while they usually can. We sat together in Melissa's office. The conversation felt awkward. Forced, like none of us were discussing the real issue. Then Brian smiled. Dad, we actually have something for you. Melissa opened a drawer and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a $50 gift card to a local diner. I stared at it for several seconds. This was their graduation thank you. After excluding me, after forging my name, after using my land to secure millions, a $50 gift card. The insult was almost impressive. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Very thoughtful, I said. The relief on their faces told me they thought I'd accepted it. What they didn't realize was that my phone had been recording the entire conversation, and before I left I decided to test something. I casually mentioned the property. The reaction was immediate. Brian stiffened. Melissa looked away. Interesting. Very interesting. Later that evening, my attorney arranged a meeting with representatives from the lending company. The executives were not happy, particularly when they learned the collateral supporting their loan might be fraudulent. Within 48 hours, they opened their own internal investigation. That was exactly what I wanted, because once lenders start asking questions, people stop lying confidently. They start making mistakes, and Brian made a huge one. 2 days later, he called me, sounding nervous, trying too hard to sound relaxed. During the conversation, he accidentally confirmed details about the loan that he should never have known. Details only the borrower could know. My attorney recorded everything. That single call became one of the strongest pieces of evidence we had. If you've ever watched someone destroy their own future because they thought nobody would uncover the truth, subscribe. Because arrogance has a way of exposing itself. Over the next week, everything accelerated. The lender froze funding. Several investors started asking uncomfortable questions. Melissa's vendors demanded immediate payment, and federal investigators became interested in certain financial transfers connected to their accounts. The pressure was building, but Brian and Melissa still believed they could recover. They thought another investor dinner would solve everything. One final presentation, one final round of funding, one final opportunity to convince wealthy investors that their empire was healthy. What they didn't know was that I had already coordinated with the lender, my attorney and federal investigators, and in 6 days, I would walk into that luxury investor dinner carrying enough evidence to destroy every lie they'd built their lives upon. The graduation party wasn't their biggest mistake. Forging my signature wasn't either. Their biggest mistake was assuming the old man in the pickup truck wasn't paying attention, and very soon they were going to learn exactly how dangerous that assumption could be. The investor dinner was held at the most expensive hotel in the city. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Waiters moved silently between tables. And nearly every person in the room controlled more money than most people would see in a lifetime. Brian and Melissa looked confident. They had no reason not to. In less than an hour, they expected to secure millions in new funding. Their future seemed guaranteed. At exactly 7:15 p.m., Brian stepped onto the stage. Melissa stood beside him, smiling proudly. A giant screen behind them displayed renderings of luxury developments and projected profits. The presentation started smoothly. Investors nodded. Questions were answered. Everything appeared to be working. Then the ballroom doors opened. I walked in. The room barely noticed me at first. Just an old man in a flannel shirt, exactly the way Brian preferred people to see me. But then several attorneys entered behind me, followed by representatives from the lending company, and finally, 2 federal investigators. That's when the room became silent. Brian's smile disappeared. Melissa looked confused, then worried, then terrified. I calmly walked to the front of the room. The lead lender stood beside me. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before any investment decisions are made, there are serious matters that require clarification." The screen behind Brian changed. Loan documents appeared, property records, bank transfers, recorded conversations, and finally the forged signature. My forged signature. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Investors stared at the evidence. Some immediately stood up. Others reached for their phones. Years of carefully built credibility vanished in minutes. If you've ever been judged by appearances while your character was worth more than everyone else's opinion combined, subscribe, because the truth eventually speaks louder than image. Brian tried to explain, then tried to deny, then tried to blame employees, but every excuse collapsed under the evidence. Melissa wasn't any more successful. The financial records from her failing company appeared next. Outstanding debts, frozen accounts, pending lawsuits. The room turned against them instantly. One investor stood and spoke words Brian would never forget. "You're finished." And he was. By the end of the night, funding offers were withdrawn, business relationships were terminated, and federal investigators formally opened their case. 3 months later, both Brian and Melissa were fighting legal battles they couldn't escape. The empire they built on deception had collapsed. As for me, I spent that evening back at my workshop. Cameron arrived shortly before sunset. He'd learned the truth, every bit of it. Without saying a word, he walked over and sat beside the handcrafted desk I'd built for him. "It's beautiful, Grandpa," he said quietly. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Because money comes and goes, businesses rise and fall, but character lasts. And unlike his parents, my grandson still understood the difference. That was worth far more than $40 million.